The West is burning.
Yeah,
And that isn't just some catchy metaphor to start the show.
not at all.
According to the material we're digging into today, it's just a statement of fact. It's that smell of ash in the air from 1,000 years of civilization basically being dismantled.
Piece by piece.
Exactly, piece by piece. And if you look around at, say, the universities, the media, HR departments, and you get that sinking feeling that the structural integrity of our society is just compromised.
That logic has essentially been traded in for feelings.
Right. If you feel that, then you are exactly who this deep dive is for today.
Because it's that gnawing sense that the map just doesn't match the territory anymore. I mean, we are operating on a software update that is totally incompatible with the actual hardware of reality.
Spot on. And today, we're doing something a little different for this deep dive. We're unpacking a text that positions itself as, not just a book, but a strategic manual.
A survival guide, really.
Yeah, a survival guide for the modern man who feels, and to use the author's very colorful language here, gelded by the state. We are doing a deep dive into the ebook Apprentice Patriarch.
Yeah.
Female Supremacy Depriving Men of Their Inheritance Under DEI by Conrad Riker.
And we really need to set the stage here, right up front. Riker is not interested in being polite.
No.
He's not trying to meet anyone in the middle. He actually describes this book as a potent red pill. His whole goal is to explain the history of our institutions, how they functioned before they were, in his view, captured by feminist and Marxist ideologies.
And how to take them back.
Exactly.
It is heavy, it's controversial, it is incredibly detailed stuff. And I want to pause real quick and just say this right out of the gate.
Yeah, the disclaimer.
Right, the disclaimer.
Yeah.
Because the sources we're covering have some highly politically charged content. Left wing, right wing, it touches on all of it. So we need to make it totally clear to you, the listener, that we are not taking sides here.
We never do.
No. We are impartially reporting on the content. We're not endorsing these viewpoints. We're simply trying to convey the ideas exactly as they are laid out in the original source material.
Just laying out the architecture of his argument.
Exactly. We're extracting the core arguments, the strategy, the historical claims. But look, we can only cover so much in a short conversation.
We're just doing reconnaissance.
Right. So if you are listening to this and you feel like this author is speaking your language, you really need to go directly to the source. You need the full artillery of his argument.
You really do.
So go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now and buy the ebook Apprentice Patriarch. Get the whole picture.
Because what we're mapping out today is Riker's blueprint for dismantling what he calls the gynocentric lie and building, he calls it a new Jerusalem.
And before we jump into the fire, do us a quick favor, hit like and subscribe right now so you don't miss any of these deep dives.
Let's get into it.
All right. Section 1. Riker calls this the diagnosis. And he kicks it off with this concept of the pyre of reason. So what exactly are we burning here?
We are burning logic, specifically on the altar of feelings.
Wow.
Yeah, that's his central thesis for the whole decline of the West. Riker argues that the foundational lie of modern society is the blank slate theory.
The idea that we're all born as completely blank canvases.
Right. The idea that human beings have no innate nature, that gender, personality, capability, it's all just social constructs programmed into us.
Like, if you give a boy a doll, he'll magically be nurturing. And if you give a girl a toy truck, she'll be aggressive.
Precisely. And Riker just takes a sledgehammer to this idea.
He really does.
He argues you cannot legislate away biology. And he doesn't just, say this as some philosophical musing. He points to one of the most tragic medical cases in history as proof.
The David Reimer case.
Yes, the David Reimer case.
I remember reading about this. This is the John Jones case.
Yeah, that's the one. And for those who might not know the history here, David Reimer was a twin boy. And due to a botched circumcision when he was an infant, he lost his genitalia.
Just a horrific accident.
Unbelievably tragic. So he was placed under the care of Dr. John Money. And Money was this huge psychologist at the time who was basically the massive proponent of this blank slate idea.
He really pushed it.
He did. So Money convinces the parents to castrate the boy, rename him Brenda, and raise him entirely as a girl.
To prove the theory.
Exactly. It was supposed to be the ultimate proof that nurture completely overrides nature.
And Riker uses this to show what happens when you try to force that.
Yeah, because it was a total catastrophe. Riker details how, despite the dresses and the hormone treatments and the intense social conditioning, Brenda was miserable.
Because the biology was screaming otherwise.
Every cell in his body knew he was male. Riker points out he tore off the dresses, he got into fistfights with his brother, he was deeply suicidal.
You knew something was wrong.
Right. And eventually, he learned the truth, and he transitioned back to living as a man. But the psychological damage was permanent. He eventually took his own life.
God.
And Riker uses this as this very grim warning, basically saying, you can force a man to act against his innate nature, but you will destroy him in the process.
And then he pivots from that raw medical tragedy straight into the corporate world. He brings up James Damore.
Right, the Google memo.
Yeah.
He sees Damore as the modern corporate version of that exact same experiment. Damore was the engineer who wrote that internal memo, suggesting, very politely I might add, that the gender gap in tech might not be 100% due to sexism.
Right, that it might actually have to do with biological differences in interests.
Differences in traits between men and women. Things like an interest in things versus an interest in people.
Which Riker points out is heavily scientifically backed.
It is a biological fact, according to the sources he cites, but because it violated the blank slate religion of the HR department...
Damore got fired.
Yeah. Riker calls it a ritual sacrifice. He says Damore was sacrificed to the gynocentric order just because he dared to speak a truth that hurt people's feelings.
And this leads right into his whole argument about the fallacy of flatness. This is where he brings in the math, right? The bell curve.
Yeah.
Break this down for us. How does the bell curve explain his stance that DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion is mathematically impossible?
Okay, so think about the distribution of IQ, or specific personality traits. Men and women do overlap a massive amount right in the middle.
The average.
Right. But Riker points out that the male distribution curve is flatter and wider, meaning there are way more men at the absolute extreme ends of the spectrum.
So the geniuses and the total disasters.
Exactly. So Riker argues that the glass ceiling, the complaint about a lack of women in top CEO roles or elite engineering positions, he says that isn't oppression.
It's just the extreme right side of the male bell curve.
Right, the hyper-competitive, obsessive top end. But here's the kicker. He says if you look at the top, you also have to look at the bottom. The glass cellar.
The glass cellar.
Yeah. Most workplace deaths, the vast majority of homeless people, the prison population, suicide victims, those are overwhelmingly men too. That's the other end of that wider curve.
So his argument is that DEI tries to force an equality of outcome by just ignoring this basic statistical distribution.
Yes. He argues that the only way to get true equality of outcome is to tyrannically suppress the high-performing men at the top just to make the spreadsheet look fair.
He calls it a war on competence.
Or on competence, yeah. And that bleeds directly into his economic theory, which honestly is one of the most provocative sections of the entire book.
Oh, without a doubt. He calls this section the Ledger of Lions.
The Ledger of Lions.
And he paints this picture of what he calls the cuckold state. Now, that is a highly loaded term for a deep dive.
Very loaded.
What does he actually mean by that in a strictly economic sense?
He's using it to describe a massive wealth transfer. Riker argues that the modern welfare state effectively functions as a surrogate husband.
Okay, unpack that.
So in a traditional setup, a man works and provides resources directly for his family. In the cuckold state, the government steps in, confiscates those resources from men through taxation, and then redistributes them to women and the children of what he calls bad boys.
Wow. Does he actually have the data to back that up, or is this just pure rhetoric?
Well, he claims the data is completely irrefutable. He leans heavily on the concept of net lifetime tax contributors.
Meaning, who puts in more than they take out?
Exactly. His argument is that if you look at the actual ledger, men are the primary producers of tax revenue. They work longer hours, they take on more dangerous jobs, and they earn more taxable income over a lifetime.
And on the flip side,
women, conversely, are the primary consumers of state resources. Things like healthcare, the welfare state, education, state pensions, because they live longer.
So he literally sees the entire modern tax system as a mechanism to take from male producers to subsidize female consumers.
Correct. He argues it's a state-subsidized lifestyle, and this naturally leads to his syllogism of the vote.
Right, where he revised the old revolutionary slogan, no taxation without representation.
But he flips it entirely.
No representation without taxation.
Exactly. Riker argues that if you are a net tax consumer, meaning you extract more from the system than you put into it, you shouldn't have the right to vote on how that money is spent.
Because it's a conflict of interest.
Right. He argues that universal suffrage has essentially become a legalized looting mechanism. Because if you let the people who just consume the resources vote, they will inevitably vote for more free stuff.
Which means taxing the producer is even harder to pay for it.
It's a death spiral.
And he uses Detroit as the ultimate case study for this, the Detroit paradox.
He does. He describes mid-20th century Detroit as the arsenal of democracy. It was the absolute peak of masculine industrial competence.
High wages, massive production, functional families.
Right. And he argues that when that strict competence hierarchy was replaced by a victimhood hierarchy and what he specifically terms gynocentric mismanagement, the whole city collapsed.
He sees Detroit not as some random economic accident, but as a direct warning.
A warning of what happens when you prioritize feelings and equity over fiscal reality and competence.
So we have the biological denial with the blank slate.
Yeah.
We have the economic drain with the cuckold state. But Riker says this didn't just happen organically. It wasn't an accident.
No, he traces it back to a very deliberate strategy. He calls it the weaponization of institutions.
This is where we get a history lesson.
Yeah, Riker points straight to the Frankfurt School and the cultural Marxists. He argues they realized early on that the West was far too wealthy for a standard economic class war to actually work. The workers were too happy.
So they pivoted.
They pivoted. They decided to dismantle the West by attacking its cultural roots instead, specifically gender roles and the nuclear family.
The long march through the institutions.
Exactly.
And he really goes after some secret cows in the section.
Yeah.
Specifically the suffragettes. I mean, I think most of us were taught in school that the suffragettes were these very noble, peaceful women who just organized to get a voice in democracy.
Riker tells a very, very different story.
Yeah, he does.
He categorizes the WSPU, the Women's Social and Political Union in the UK, not as a civil rights group, but as an actual paramilitary organization.
Which is wild to hear.
He digs deep into the historical archives. He lists the bombings at St. Paul's Cathedral.
Wait, they actually bombed a cathedral?
According to his sources, yes. Bombings, arson attacks on tea pavilions, violently attacking the home of the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Lloyd George.
So his point is that history has been heavily sanitized.
Sanitized to completely erase male victimhood and female violence. But his philosophical objection is actually even deeper than just the violent tactics. It all comes back to the social contract.
The link between the vote and the draft.
Right. Historically, having the right to vote was intrinsically tied to the obligation to serve in the military. If you had the power to vote for a war, you had to be the one willing to go die in it.
Skin in the game.
Exactly. Riker argues that the suffragettes demanded the power of the vote without the brutal responsibility of the draft.
He calls it rights without responsibilities.
Which he points out is the defining characteristic of a child, not an adult citizen.
And he traces that lack of accountability right into the modern legal system. She spends a massive amount of time on the Duke Lacrosse case.
Yeah, that's his benchmark for the modern era. That was the highly publicized case where members of the Duke Lacrosse team were falsely accused of assault.
And the media, the faculty, everyone just piled on immediately.
Without waiting for facts. Riker argues that the narrative privileged white males hurting a minority woman was just so politically juicy that actual evidence didn't matter at all to the institution.
Even though the DNA evidence eventually cleared those boys completely.
Eventually. But Riker points out that the process is the punishment. He views the Duke case as the direct precursor to what we see today with Title IX tribunals on college campuses.
He calls those star chambers.
Yeah, these quasi-legal hearings where young men accused of misconduct are routinely denied legal counsel, denied the right to cross-examine their accuser, and basically presumed guilty from the start.
Due process is just gone. And then he extends this institutional weaponization to family court. He talks about Title 4D.
This is a very specific federal program he highlights, and it's alarming. Title 4DD provides federal money to states based directly on how much child support they collect.
So the states get a cut.
Yes. Riker argues this literally incentivizes the state to break up families. He calls the state a pimp that takes a cut of the child support check.
Because it creates a massive financial motive for the system to favor divorce, grant custody to the mother, and extract money from the father.
It's a rigged game through and through, according to the book.
But Riker doesn't just stick to the systemic level. He dives deep into the psychology of individual relationships, too.
Section 4.
Section 4, the solipsism of sirens and female nature. This is where he really unpacks the whole nice guy versus bad boy dynamic.
And this is absolutely crucial for any guy listening who is trying to navigate the modern dating market. Riker argues there's this massive, unbridgeable gap between what women say they want and what their biology actually responds to.
Right, because they always say they want a nice guy, someone safe, emotionally compliant, agreeable.
But Riker claims the ancient hindbrain, the primitive part of the brain, paves the dangerous man.
Competence and dominance.
Yes. And he uses the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial as his major cultural touchstone for this.
Oh, that's a perfect example.
He says the whole damsel in distress narrative completely collapsed in real time when the public finally saw the receipts.
The audio recordings.
Right. It showed that the woman could absolutely be the primary aggressor and the man could be the victim. But more than that, he argues it exposed the chaotic, primal nature of that kind of dynamic.
And he uses some pretty technical evolutionary biology terms here that we should probably unpack. Braffolt's law and Bateman's principle. Let's start with Bateman. What is Bateman's principle?
Think of Bateman's principle as the baseline economics of biology. It basically states that sperm is biologically cheap and abundant, but eggs and the process of pregnancy are incredibly expensive and rare.
So because the female investment in reproduction is so overwhelmingly high, 9 months of gestation plus nursing, she becomes the ultimate gatekeeper.
She is the selector, pure supply and demand.
And the male must compete to be chosen.
Exactly. He has to take risks. But Riker connects this biological reality to a massive technological shift, the invention of the contraceptive pill. He argues that the pill fundamentally unshackled the female libido from the actual consequences of pregnancy. It artificially lowered the biological cost of sex.
And how did that change the vetting process for men?
Riker argues it completely destroyed it. Before the pill, women had to vet men heavily for long-term stability, provision, and commitment because making a mistake was catastrophic.
Okay.
After the pill, Riker argues women felt free to just chase pure genetic fitness, the alpha, the bad boy. They could get the thrill without needing his resources because they could prevent pregnancy.
Which leaves the average nice guy who might actually be an incredible provider and father completely out in the cold.
He becomes functionally invisible in the modern mating market.
So if you look at the whole diagnostic up to this point, it is pretty bleak.
Very bleak.
I mean, the West is burning, the economy is structured to loot you, the courts are openly hostile to you, and evolutionary biology is working against you.
If you stopped reading right there, you'd just be utterly depressed.
But Apprentice Patriarch claims to be a manual. He doesn't just leave you there. He offers a very specific solution. He calls it the citadel of Stoicism.
This is the system restore. Riker is crystal clear here. You cannot vote your way out of this mess.
The system is too captured.
Exactly. You have to build your way out. And that process starts internally, with the self.
His mantra is great. Gravity does not care about your feelings.
I love that line. He demands strict physical strength from his readers, lifting heavy iron. He spends time talking about the testosterone deficit crisis in modern men and the absolute necessity of rejecting what he calls soy-based subservience.
He wants men to become the overmen.
Right, bringing in that Nietzschean concept, someone who actively embraces struggle and hardship to forge himself.
As opposed to the last man.
Who just wants comfort, safety, and video games.
And he pairs that physical forging with an intellectual one. He talks about reviving the trivium.
Grammar, logic, and rhetoric, the foundation of a classical education. Riker says men need to relearn these specific tools so they can dismantle woke arguments in real time.
Right, like when HR uses a word like equity or fairness.
Exactly. Riker says you need the logical tools to force them to rigorously define that term, rather than just letting them use it as this vague emotional weapon to get you to comply.
Control the language, control the frame.
Yeah.
But he goes even further than just self-improvement. He outlines a strategy for total institutional autonomy. He calls it the exit.
Starve the beast. That is the core strategy. Financially, he advocates for entirely bypassing the traditional banking system.
How does he suggest doing that?
He pushes hard for using Bitcoin, hoarding physical gold, buying land, hard assets that the fiat beast cannot just inflate away.
Or freeze your bank account if you hold the wrong political opinions.
Exactly. Protection from cancellation.
And what about the next generation? What about the kids?
He is militantly against public schooling. He calls the public education system the digital one-room schoolhouse.
He argues that sending your sons to public school is basically sending them into enemy territory to be indoctrinated.
And medicated. He talks about the Ritalin stare, pumping boys full of amphetamines just to make them sit still in an environment built for girls.
So his solution is homeschooling.
Homeschooling, completely controlling their intellectual diet to protect their minds.
And finally, there's the social aspect. Rebuilding what he calls cells of competence.
This is all about true brotherhood. Riker points out that men historically always had exclusive spaces.
Unions, the Elks Lodges, private clubs.
Right, and those were systematically dismantled or forced by the state to integrate. Riker says men need to quietly start building new, private, male-only groups.
Based on merit and utility.
Not just a group of drinking buddies, but actual networks of highly competent men who can trade skills and rely entirely on each other outside the purview of the state.
It really is a comprehensive step-by-step strategy for building a parallel society.
It is.
And before we wrap this up, we absolutely have to mention his final, almost sci-fi prediction at the end of the book, the singularity.
This is such a fascinating, wild way to end the manifesto. Riker suggests that technology, specifically the development of artificial wombs, might eventually make the entire gynocentric contract completely obsolete.
Because if the biological monopoly is broken,
It changes everything. He argues that if men can reproduce and maintain civilization without needing the biological participation of women, it could lead to the evolution of an entirely new species of man.
a total literal separation.
It is an incredibly provocative thought to leave the reader wrestling with.
It's a lot to process.
Yeah.
And honestly, we have only just scratched the surface here today.
Oh, yeah.
Riker provides so many charts, deep historical footnotes, raw economic data. It is a dense, fiery read. If you want the full blueprint, if you are serious about understanding the history of these captured institutions before it's too late, you need to buy this book.
We really do.
The book is called Apprentice Patriarch. Go to Amazon Kindle, go to Google Play Books, and get it right now.
And look, this is an ongoing, active battle for him. He releases daily intelligence reports that expand on all of this.
Hello.
You definitely need to follow him. His handle is at Conrad N. Riker. That's at ConradNrikeR.
You can find him on Substack, Twitter, and YouTube, right?
Yes, very active on all three. Follow at Conrad N. Riker.
Make sure you check that out. So, the question Riker leaves us with is simple, but honestly, it's pretty terrifying.
Yeah.
The West is burning. Are you going to stay in the building and burn with it, or are you going to step out and build a new Jerusalem?
That is really the only question that matters.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and honestly get to work.
We'll see you in the next one.